Hello, I'm John Beattie. Welcome to Cask to Glass, the Whisky podcast, where we examine the heritage and the flavour of Scotland's national drink and the world's favourite spirit. Now, today, I'm talking to Dave Broom, the author of this book I have in my hand, The World Atlas of Whisky, one of the best known faces and voices in the world of whisky. Dave Broom, thank you so much for talking to me. How are you today?
I'm very well indeed, thanks. Great to be on the show.
No, it's brilliant. And we always start, we ask everybody, how do you, I mean, I've got this book in front of me, right? So anybody who wants to buy the book on whiskey, that's the book. And I've been trying to plough my way through this as research. How do you take your whiskey?
How do I take my whiskey? Normally with a wee drop of water. And temperatures, it's fairly hot down here. Well, it's cloudy today, but in hot temperatures, I'll have a highball. I'm a big believer in, you can dilute whiskey, you can mix with whiskey. So that would probably be my go-to serve in the summertime.
And if you had to pick one whiskey, what would it be?
No. I mean, you just held up the book, didn't you? I think it's impossible to say these days. There's a number of drams which I suppose I gravitate towards, but there is so much out there at the moment. This week, for example, I tried 3 new Tormores, which are the first that Elixir distillers have released. So I'm in love with the bourbon barrel for that. But next week, I'm fickle. Next week there'll be something else. The week before that there was some great stuff from France. So yeah, it's an extraordinary time in whisky's history.
Well, come on. I wasn't going to get there now. I was going to go back to, I love the quote about, this is you talking about yourself. I'm Scottish. We don't like talking about ourselves. So here's a quick run through. But I will talk about you. Why, and again, I've read you writing about this, why is it an extraordinary time?
Because there's never been such a period in whisky's history where so much has been made in so many different styles in so many different countries. If you think back to whisky's kind of recent history, the last 100 years or so, essentially it's been dominated by Scotch, and it was dominated until very recently by Scotch blends. America, obviously America was making bourbon, but post-prohibition that shrank down to very few, and that was kind of in the American market alone. Canada was producing, but essentially just for American consumption. Japan was producing, but essentially just for Japanese consumption. So the world of whisky essentially belonged to Scotch, and now you have, I would say, pretty much every country in the world where distillation is legal making whisky. There's probably too much whisky getting made, which is something we'll probably touch on later. But if you are a whisky lover, you have never had so much choice. And I think the beauty about it is, and that was something that really came into focus when I was doing the Atlas, is the thinking of the whisky makers around the world. That if they're making single malt, they're wanting to make a single malt that reflects where they are from. They're not trying to make Scotch, they're not trying to copy Scotch, they're understanding their local climate, what is growing there, what casks they can use, etc. So the diversity of flavour and the diversity and range of thinking is now greater than ever before. And that's fantastic for a whisky lover, and it's fantastic for a writer as well.
Do you know, I was down, I've said before, I was in a place called Moss Park in a caravan with a friend of my wife and her husband, and he had a Taiwanese whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And it just about blew my head off. It was beautiful. It was strong, but it was beautiful. So can we talk about this book then? We'll jump around. This is nothing to do with the planned order of discussion. How on earth did you put this? This is the Bible. How did you put this together?
I didn't have grey hair when I started it. It was 10 years since the last one, so this is the 3rd edition. And stuff happened in the past 10 years, and in my life and writing other books, and then COVID and blah blah blah. So there was always meant to be a 3rd edition, but it was postponed for various reasons. And then when I then kind of looked seriously at what was out there in the world, realised that it couldn't just be a new edition, it had to be a complete rewrite. So how I approached it was, I'd been kind of amassing notes and tasting notes and, travelling around the world. But I also got in touch with friends in, far-flung places, going, okay, right, I can't put every distillery in the world in this book, because otherwise it would just be a directory. So who's most exciting, who's pushing things forward. So between what I'd already researched and what various friends around the world told me, I then kind of got it down to, the 500 or so entries that are in there.
Yeah, more than 500 distilleries.
Yeah.
This is the World Whisky Atlas. More than 500 distilleries profiled and 480 expressions tasted.
Yes, and that's
Good
480 in the book. There were many more tasted out with it. So yeah, I mean, it just took, it took time. But the whole point about the book is that it's a map of where distilleries are. So it functions in that particular way. It's a map of flavour. I mean, I always wanted to the atlases have always been about flavour. Not, why a distillery makes something, what it makes, but also why a distillery makes it, and why the flavours are there. And then taking those flavours and get those whiskies and then putting them into flavour camps. So it means that, I'm wearing a t-shirt from New Zealand here. So if you taste Waiheke whiskey,
right,
then, the flavour camp will be able to say, well, this fits in here. Therefore, here are 100 other whiskies within this flavour camp. So there's a commonality in terms of flavour. And then I realised it's kind of going back to that earlier point, that it's also a map of mindsets, because it was really intriguing that the way in which a distiller in Japan was approaching whiskey might be slightly similar to the way a whiskey maker in Norway was making his whiskey, or one in Argentina. So you had these kind of little threads of similarity or similar thinking, maybe different flavours, but similar thinking. So the world, rather than being this kind of quite scary mass of just distilleries and brands and stuff just being flung at you, it is linked together. So it is both individual but also incredibly well linked. So yeah, it was a fascinating project. Just what killed me, but it was a fascinating project.
in the nicest possible way. Where are the kind of boundaries being pushed? I mean, if you think about whiskey, it is made all over the world, and there are different types of whiskies. Where are the boundaries? What are the differences you see?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think one of the boundaries, coming back to what you were saying there, is climate. You would never have thought, a decade ago, that Taiwan would produce whiskey, because oh my God, it's far too hot. It's the wrong place for whiskey. Which is kind of the Scotch thinking. Whiskey has to be made in a slightly chilly, damp climate. So the rise of subtropical whiskies, for want of a better term, so that'd be Taiwan, it'd be India, it'd be some distilleries in China, it would also be the distilleries in the south of Japan, around about Kyushu. That's a boundary, so climatic boundaries are being broken. There's a distillery, at least 2 distilleries in the Arctic Circle.
Wow.
Different climatic conditions there.
Wow.
The use of different grains, so not just barley, but every other cereal crop. So that's going to give you different flavour. I would say in recent times, the way in which a lot of distillers are going back and looking at flavourful, lower yielding heritage grains, and that could be barley. It could also be corn. Some great distilleries in America exploring corn or rye. So all of a sudden, you're seeing raw materials being used in different ways. If you don't have peat and you want a smoky whiskey, what do you use? Well, you use the fuel that probably has been used for food. So in New Zealand, for example, Manuka smoke, which is used in the barbecues. There's a distillery in Namibia that's using elephant dung to smoke its grains. So there's the boundaries for you. Not just using wood. By law, Scotch has to be aged in oak casks, but I would say pretty much every other of the newer countries making whiskey, they've allowed a degree of flex in that, saying it has to be in wood. So you're beginning to see different woods being used. Again, different flavours. So that's where boundaries are being pushed. I haven't even got into distillation.
You're frying my brain. I don't know if you'd heard this. I was in Islay last week, this week. Great rugby player died and lived in Islay. Ian McLaughlin, mighty man.
Yeah.
Fantastic player. And driving along, the bloke who took me along said, look, there's a shortage of water on Islay now. So one of the big, I won't name it just in case it's wrong, but one of the big distilleries is going to shut down for a while in the summer because it can't get enough water. And they have to import water to Islay because the process is so water intensive, not just to make the whiskey, but to do everything else. They're going to import water to Islay because they haven't got enough water in the island, which is extraordinary. And likewise, the peat supply is ever reducing.
Yeah, I mean, the water thing, I would say that it kind of happens every year on Islay. It depends on winter. How wet has your winter been? How wet has the spring been? It was all right last year. It was great for the water, but bad for the barley. So because so much of Islay's water is coming from lochs rather than from springs.
Not coming down the mountainside.
If you have low rainfall over winter, your dams are going to be that much lower. So, yeah, I mean, and you need a hell of a lot of water to make whiskey. So one way, one big issue obviously at the moment, within life itself is sustainability. So the way in which distillers are being able to reuse water, reduce their water, water usage, but still make the whiskey. That's one great frontier. Same with peat. Use less peat, but to get the same effect. And it's
I know you don't want to talk about yourself.
To be honest, Jack. It's the same as Skye. We've been to Skye. It rains a fair amount in Skye, but Skye rock is very, very hard, and the water just bounces off it. So until very recently, Talisker would close down every summer because there simply wasn't enough water coming out. But
it's the same theory, isn't it? The more building you do, the more the water goes straight into the water.
Aye.
We'll get back to that episode in a second, but the best free way you can support the podcast is just hit the thumbs up button on this video and subscribe so you get new episodes every week. It also helps lots more people find the podcast. So thank you. I know you didn't want to talk about yourself, but what I love about your CV is you've had more jobs than I have. You've had more changes in career. So born and educated in Glasgow, 7 years in Oddbins, writing about jazz and music. I'm a musician too. You were both musicians. 7 years features editor, off-license news.
Yep.
Australia.
Yeah, for a bit.
Australian winery. Keep going. You've had an incredible career.
Yeah, it's all
you've been TV, films, books.
Aye, moving target.
Aye.
If you're a freelance, you've got to keep moving. Yeah, it's apart from the brief period when I was writing about music, my entire life has been in drink. So.
It's a great world. You know what I found having come into it? It's a friendly world. There's a bit of snobbery, like there's snobbery in music, there's snobbery in rugby, there's snobbery in broadcasting, there's a kind of perceived level of being good or whatever. But the thing about this industry, it's mostly good people. Good people who care about it, who want to just do the best they can with the product.
That's such a lovely way of putting it. They care about it. They care deeply about it. And I would say especially on the production side, the archive side, people are in there and they love what they do. And I think that's a beautiful thing about getting into the whiskey trade and then going to whiskey shows around the world, and you're beginning to know the distillers and blenders, etc. And they will all get together at the end of the show, and they'll all be trying each other's whiskies and helping each other, sharing information, etc. It's incredibly collegiate in that aspect. From a sales and marketing point of view, everybody's trying to kick lumps out of each other. But
take their section.
But it is incredibly friendly and global industry. I mean, last week I was in Bordeaux. We were running the World Whisky Forum in Bordeaux, and there was a great example of distillers from 11 countries getting together, and essentially we were discussing, how to get out, strategies to get out of the current downturn. And everybody was completely open and transparent, and everybody was tasting each other's whiskies, and genuinely trying to work together to help. So yeah, I would agree 100%. It's a really, really friendly industry. It's just great. It's home.
Talk me through the downturn, because there you are at this conference, and you're trying to look at ways of getting out of it, and the world seems to have become, trade in general is depressed. So you've got the Russia invaded Ukraine. You've got America sticking on tariffs, trying to change their balance of payments. You've got more competition. There's more, as you said at the outset, more and more countries making whiskey. And in the middle of it, we've got Scotch. What do you think's happening?
Well, it's this perfect storm. So you have low consumer confidence. You have political issues. You've got war. You have a generational shift that's taking place, and it's happened before, and it's happened. It essentially happens every 20 years or so. There is a blip, or there's a downturn then, and whiskey has always rolled its way through, peaks and troughs. So it was coming, and if you look back, the warning signs were there about 6 years ago that there was already overcapacity, but people keep, pumping it out, and the going was good. So I think there was an element of the industry sleepwalking into it. And I think part of it, to be honest, is that within the majors especially, there are very few people still working who remember what it was like in the late 80s, and then the strategies that were used to get out of that. And even the next generation of executives in the big companies are no longer there. So you have a cohort of sales and marketing, for what want of an overall descriptor, who've never been through this before. And I think there's also this kind of element of panic going on. And there's so many contributory factors to it. Prices went up far too quickly. Everybody went mad during COVID and began, spending lots of money. All of a sudden there was disposable income. So the whiskey sales went up. Prices went up. All of a sudden, we're on the roller coaster again. Yes, we keep going. But it was a blip. And now what you've got is all of these pressures, plus this downturn, and people going, well, whiskey's way too expensive. I can't afford this anymore. And I think... Sorry, I could just keep going on about this, but I think also, to be honest, there's this. I think we're all deeply psychologically damaged by COVID.
Do you?
Yeah, and we are still working our way through this. That even if you have disposable income, you're kind of going, I better hold on to something because I don't know what's around the corner, because the world almost ended. And I think that affects business, and I think that affects people's, people's approach, people's, general spending ability or willingness to spend. So all of this is kind of coming together. The inevitable downturn of whiskey from on this kind of 20-year cycle, plus all of these other pressures. But whiskey is resilient, and whiskey always has got out of these problems, and it will take some clever strategies. But it will get out of it. But there will be casualties, undoubtedly.
Will there? I think there'll be a few people borrowed too much money, invested too much money, got to wait for the return. I'm an accountant by training, and the whiskey industry is very different, isn't it? You borrow a lot of money, you invest the money, and then you've got to wait a long time. And if you don't then sell, you're in trouble.
Yes, and that is... That's the issue at the moment. If you look at Ireland is a good example of what's happening. The Waterford distillery collapsed earlier this year. Right. It was saddled with a huge amount of debt. But the knock-on effect, the tremors from that collapse, have gone out to the entire Irish industry, especially of the new distillers. So you're seeing a downturn in the market, but all of a sudden now you've got investors who don't necessarily fully understand what whiskey is like, and it's a long-term business, and you have to wait for at least 10 years before your distillery begins to even break even. They're spooked, and they're withdrawing their money. The banks won't lend anymore because banks don't understand this thing called whiskey, because you're just throwing money into this pit because you need more casks and you need more warehousing, and we're going to make a profit in a decade. Nobody's going to lend, in that sort of economic climate. So you're seeing a lot of these smaller distillers being suddenly really exposed because they need more capital coming in, and the investors are going, oof, no, sorry.
Yeah. So there are casualties coming.
It's not a risk,
So, I remember there was an American economist who predicted the property price crashes. You get these overheated property values, and then everyone borrows, and then suddenly you realise actually it's a bubble. It's just a thing that back when I was a boy, you could only borrow 2.5 times your salary to buy a house, and you got half your wife's salary, and that's the way it worked. Whereas now you get people trying to borrow or trying to buy a house at 8 times their salary, and he predicted it was every 15 years, but you're saying whiskey's every 20 years.
Roughly speaking, every 20 years. And part of it is this generational shift.
What's the generational shift? Because we're a lot older now.
You don't want to drink what your parents drank. And something new has come along, and all of a sudden it's exciting. I think the big crash of the late 70s, early 80s. When a huge number of distilleries closed in Scotland. That was a generation going, I don't want to drink whiskey because that's my dad's drink or my granddad's drink. But I'll drink vodka. So there's this real pivot away from.
And we're back there, are we?
See, I'm wondering about this one. I wonder about it. I don't think there is a complete rejection of whiskey. I think there is. I'm not seeing, generation, either millennials or whoever going, I'm not going to drink whiskey. They're sort of saying, I'm drinking less. I'm not, you're not seeing tequila suddenly taking off, or rum suddenly taking off, and gin seems to have collapsed as well. So I think that there is a general shift in consumption where I don't think they're rejecting alcohol, but I think they're being much more choosy in terms of what they're drinking and how they are drinking it. There's a great whiskey bar, I live in Brighton, there's a great whiskey bar called Cut Your Wolf Loose down here.
Let me write that down. My brother lives down there.
Well worth popping into, let me know when you're in town. And it's a brilliant bar, they do their own independent bottlings, it's got an amazing selection of whiskies and stuff. But in recent months or so, they're realising that the young people who are coming into the bar are wanting cocktails. And all they sell is whiskey, but they're wanting whiskey cocktails, and they're happy to drink highballs or other mixes. So they've pivoted away from just being, right, let's just have a dram in a glass with a wee bit of water on the side, into, right, okay, our offering is going to be more skewed towards the consumers who are coming in. And that was one of the great conclusions from last week in Bordeaux, which is the industry has forgotten how to sell. And this happens. It's happened in the 70s and happened in the 80s, when it's easy to sell. The salesman is just going to walk in and go, okay, right, what do you want? Distillers have forgotten how to get out there, and they've been very good at telling people what they should drink in recent years. But they've not been very good at listening to what people actually want to drink and at what price they want to drink. So one way to get out of this is to find the whiskies that people like, find the serves that they like, and give people what they want. Actually going out and doing their job, which I think is really positive, actually, because that then re-establishes the connection. Because I don't think there's a rejection of whiskey.
So how do you think the world's going to change then? Because how do you think the world's going to change in terms of whiskey? Because I keep covering stories that are actually the majority of us are my age now. When I was a kid at school, there were 1.5 million people younger than me when I was 17, and there were 750,000 pensioners, and that's almost flipped. And most of Western Europe's the same. Most of America's aging as well, because you've got to produce 2.2 kids per couple to maintain the population, and none of us are doing that. So the whole of the Western world, obviously the Middle East is expanding, China decreasing, Japan decreasing. So when you went to this conference then, and they discussed these things, and they talk about a generational shift and having forgotten to sell, what's the spin on? Given that the world that they're selling to is aging, what's the spin on that we'll see then when it comes to whiskey?
Yeah, you have to continue to, even if the world is aging, you still have to have new drinkers coming in.
True, very true.
I remember when I started writing about it, with Off License News, that was late 80s, and the market's going down, a million cases, written off, the UK market in 1 year. And what I always heard from the marketing guys at that time was, well, we can't do anything too radical because we don't want to scare our core drinkers. But the core drinkers were dying.
Okay.
And it was, when all these vodka drinkers turned 35, it was all 35, it was weird. All these core drinkers
they'll start drinking whiskey.
All these young drinkers turn 35, their palates won't mature, and all of a sudden, the whiskey will be there for them. You've got to go. You have to go. You've got to keep people happy, obviously, but you have to find strategies to allow a new generation to come through. Otherwise, you die. You fossilise, and when you fossilise is the point when a new generation goes, this is not for me, because this is old-fashioned. There was a lovely talk last week. We got in somebody, winemaker, MD and winemaker Chateau Talbot, very, very posh Bordeaux estate. And Bordeaux is 20,000 vines
Bordeaux.
up in the past 2 years. There's an image issue,
with Bordeaux.
With Bordeaux, it's old-fashioned. It's old-fashioned.
Really?
It's top-end wines. It's all of this, and they've got a serious issue. Trying to twist this round because the image has become fossilised. This is the old drink. Whiskey has to continue to be relevant. Sorry, I'm almost coming up with problems here. But the danger is that it is people of our age who then make the decisions, and we're not cool. We don't know what cool is. And whiskey trying to be cool is another turn off. So you've got to be quite careful in that consumer research and finding out, what people actually want to drink, and then how whiskey fits into that. Not changing itself fundamentally, but how do you talk about it? A lot of it is down to storytelling and narrative.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. The story behind the whiskey.
Yeah.
I love telling the amazing story of Scotland's whiskey industry and sharing some positivity about one of the incredible things this country has given the world. Now, if you want to share some positivity too, leave us a 5-star rating wherever you are listening to the podcast. It takes you 10 seconds and will help Cast to Glass reach a much, much wider audience. We've gone through the cocktail thing before. I'm an old rugby player. I remember covering games at Murrayfield when I think the famous Grouse was sponsors, and Grouse had gone into cocktails.
That's right.
You could buy cans of Grouse and ginger beer.
Yeah, the ginger Grouse.
Did that work?
I think it did temporarily. Yeah, I think it did. I don't think it was ever going to be the saviour of Grouse, but it got people thinking about whiskey in a new way.
That's what we're going to see.
There's no magic bullet. That's what I'm saying. It's not just going to be, boom. This is the way that this will solve all the problems. I mean, you saw that in Japan. I mean, I think Japan's a great example of what happened. Japan was in a 25-year decline in whiskey from the late 90s, and nobody was drinking. Again, rejection. Young generation drinking shochu, not drinking whiskey. And kind of last minute solution was, let's try the highball. Let's try the highball in izakaya and serve it chilled in, on draft, whiskey and soda on draft, low alcohol. Boom, took off.
Wow.
Suddenly it became trendy. And then off the back of that, you have a new generation who are going, well, actually, I love this. It's a great, refreshing drink. But what is this thing called whiskey? And they're getting into single malt, and they're getting into everything else. So it was a step forward. Some people continued just to drink highballs. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it wasn't right. Whiskey's only about this. That's the danger of a lot of the marketing. Johnnie Walker Gold Label is a beautiful, beautiful dram, and it works incredibly well when you freeze it, because it's got a load of klein leash in it and loads of great grain. It goes really, gloopy and unctuous when it's frozen. And Diageo went, yeah, that's great. So the only strategy they had for Johnnie Walker Gold Label was put it in the freezer, and after about 6 months. And I think there's bars in London still with a bottle of Johnnie Walker Gold Label entombed in the freezer. Because it was a blip, but it got people talking about whiskey again. But then it wasn't followed through. But yeah, you've got to try new things. You have to try new things, but don't expect that there's only going to be one magic bullet.
Yeah, but what you're hinting at is in the future we're going to be hearing things like highballs, cocktails.
Yeah.
Things that would get you into a younger place. That's having been at the conference, that's the future of whiskey.
Yeah, no.
And this is temporary, where we are now is temporary.
It is a future for whiskey. And yes, it is temporary. Whiskey will come back. It might take another 3, 4, maybe even 5 years for it to come back, but it will come back. And if you then look at what whiskey is doing well at the moment, let's talk about the UK market. But I think that this, speaking to guys around the world, essentially it's pretty much the same. The brands that are doing well in the UK at the moment are brands like Ardnamurchan, which is selling for 50 quid, roughly £50 a bottle. Ardnamurchan, Glen Scotia, Fettercairn, Razzie, etc., Macnean, all coming in round about that 50, 60, 65 pound bracket. It's still a fair whack of money, but people are buying them. People aren't spending any more because they're conscious of not wanting to spend too much. But these brands are doing well. And then you look at, you speak to, retailers in France, the same thing is happening there, same in Australia, same in the States. And if people are wanting to buy more expensive whiskies in the States these days, and here's a really interesting phenomenon over there, they're buying their favourite now too expensive bottle of whiskey, but they're buying a smaller format. So they're buying a half bottle of Weller, for example, rather than a full bottle, because they can't afford the full bottle, but they want the dram and they'll have it as a special occasion. So, and then Port of Leith, the great vertical distillery, Port of Leith. Port of Leith have launched something called table whiskey, which is a North British grain, and it sells for £35 a bottle. Boom! And it tastes great. You've got the great blends coming out from Woven, building on what Compass Box had done. I think there's a lot of positives out there. I think I might have been coming over as some sort of doom monk.
No.
But I genuinely think there are bright spots, and you have to then look and see, right, okay, what are people buying? Why are they buying it? How are they drinking it? And then you strategize from that. But you've got to go and speak to people.
Do you've given us a brilliant insight into the world of whiskey. Can I just come back to you to end this? Because I don't want to keep you all morning. I know you're busy. What have you still to do? Having written the book, having a broadcast, being in the films, what do you still want to do in whiskey or in the world?
Yeah, well,
You're going to become an accountant.
Yeah, I'm off to Ireland on Monday to pretty much finish off a film that we're doing on Irish whiskey, and actually the cultural renaissance within Ireland. So it's whiskey and music and literature and everything all combining together. Fossicking around in whiskey history with my friend Arthur Motley and Liquid Antiquarian, finding really kind of, lost histories. I've got a rum book that I want to do, which I will be doing. So yeah, there's lots to do. finding the stories. I think the joy of whiskey is that this is kind of going back to how we started our chat. The joy of whiskey is that there is always something new coming through the door, and that keeps you alive, and that keeps you interested, and that keeps the energy going. So no, I'm not hanging up my. You don't hang up pens, do you? I'm not putting my pen down.
No, and nobody wants to stop working, do they? I don't want to stop working. I don't know about you, but I'm way over our time. We'll do a longer chat. This is a longer chat than normal, and I'm pleased you're doing. You mentioned Ireland, and I always think a bit like golf, and a bit like tourism. Mm-hmm. The Irish do pretty well at this. They have a kind of. They got a good message. They've got an easy, simple message, haven't they? You go around the world, there are Irish bars everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we invented golf. Scotch is part of our DNA. Mm-hmm. Do you think, in some ways, we don't quite go about it as well as the Irish? Or do we do it better than the Irish? What do you think?
I think from a whiskey point of view, I would almost like flip it on its head. It's a great question, and a wee story to tell you about this. We were on holiday in Tunisia years ago, and we were chatting with people, and my wife speaks French. I don't really speak French, and saying, and they're saying, "Where are you from?" And I would say, "I'm Écosse," and they were going. You haven't a clue, oh, you must be German. Oh, are you English? Well, no, I'm not Scottish.
No.
I'm Scottish.
Different. It's different. It's different. Yeah.
And then I think one day, out of sheer frustration, I went, whiskey. They went, Scotland.
Tunisia.
So, Ireland has its signifiers around the world, and it's which to be honest, some of the paddywhackery is a bit ridiculous. But that is how Ireland has sold itself around the world, and Scotland has sold itself around the world by being whiskey. I would say pretty much anywhere in the world you go and you say whiskey, people will say Scotch to begin with, and they will think of Scotland even if they don't necessarily know where it is. So I think we have been good, and I think Scotch has been good for Scotland. Bringing people in. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go down the Irish route, and it's interesting to see the new wave of Irish distillers essentially not going down that route. There's no leprechauns and shamrocks on any of those bottles, so which I think is a good thing. Just as you don't see an awful lot of kilts these days in whisky shows unless they're worn by Dutchmen.
That's a brilliant way to end. So you can be anywhere in the world, and you can say Scottish, and people go Scotch.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dave Broom, thanks for talking to me. Thank you so much.
An absolute treat. I really enjoyed it.
We're never going home. We're never